Peace and love, peace and love, peace and love to the Universal Supreme. I am your host, Queen B, and this is part two of Numbers Matter crossover with Justice on Earth, where we honor the great Malcolm X. So tonight we're continuing and completing the transformative, triumphant, tragic, and quite tumultuous journey that Malcolm lived through his life. Through his short life, we know he got cut short, like we talked about in part one. We are eternally grateful for his presence. Of course, this is honoring his 100th birthday that he just had on May 19th. We're really just doing this tribute to honor him, look at his history, and make sure that we're keeping his legacy alive and really building on the things that he went through and the things that he laid down for us already. So that's really the main goal that we do here. So thank you so much. I want to take this time right now to welcome all of you new subscribers to the channel, to Numerologics or Teller BTV. Whether you're watching this on either channel, please subscribe to me on both channels. And I honor you and I appreciate you and thank you for watching and subscribing. If you're new to the channel, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss when we upload new content. Okay, so we're about to get ready to dive right into the second transformation of Malcolm X. We talked about the first transformation the other night when he transformed from Malcolm Little to Malcolm X and transformed his life and all that kind of stuff, working through his pinnacles, working through his challenges. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the second transformation from Malcolm X to El-Hajj Malik El Shabazz. This is going to be pretty interesting, and I can't wait to really get started here. So let me go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull the slides up on the stage, and we're going to skip right through. Okay, remember, this is what we're here for. I wanted to also say, if you guys want to get a keys chart, please hit me up at numeralytics.biz, or you can hit me up on the moon line at 302-492-7722. The keys chart is a very in-depth chart to get you started on your numerology journey and get you started with getting you in tune with your own spirit, your own individual frequency, and the energies that surround you and your personality and the conditions that you're going through, your cycles and all of that. So make sure you hit me up for your keys chart. And let me just get over to the next slides. This was the first transformation. So here I want to get to this slide because this was the slide that ended off his developmental cycle. When we ended up off his developmental cycle, the numbers that led this cycle were his number 3, his challenge number, his number 4, his key name, and that was his top pinnacle and his first challenge. Number 1, his individual frequency. The number 9, his expression, which is actually his second pinnacle, because I made a mistake there, so I'm correcting that tonight. His second pinnacle is not a 9, it's a 7, not a 7, it's a 9. And then his first pinnacle, number 6, were the vital few in his developmental cycle that were leading the charge. So we already discussed those. I just wanted to give a small recap on that before we got started. And here we are. This is where we are right now, the productive cycle. As you can see, the productive cycle, we discussed this on the show before, lasts from age 28 to age 56. Of course, like I said, a lot of our cultural icons and our leaders get their productive cycles cut short. It's almost like someone doesn't want our icons and leaders to get into their harvest cycle and get into that second pinnacle where they're really established and they're really being able to make some groundbreaking changes. So it's almost like they're getting cut short, just short of that. Malcolm got cut short, 17 years short of his to complete his productive cycle and robbed completely of his harvest cycle. So that's interesting to note. And then, of course, from age 31 to actually age 39 is what drives his second pinnacle period. And that pinnacle period is dominated by the number 9. Like I said, in the first episode, I had number 7 there. Of course, I'm human, so we do make mistakes. But of course, that's why I'm glad that I waited to do this episode so I could recap and make sure that I had everything correct. And we did get that corrected. That's what we do here. So, what we want to talk about. So, Malcolm's second pinnacle is ruled by the 9. And that second pinnacle, ruled by the 9, rules completions, greatness, breadth of experience, brotherhood. It also denotes disappointments in the personal, but reward in the universal. It's important to cultivate love, selflessness, and sympathy. Those are necessary in this cycle. And let's also note that 9 is also his expression, which intensifies this energy. We want to make sure we note that. And also noting that 9 as an expression denotes tragedy for those on life stage. That energy is intensified by this being his second pinnacle, and this is the pinnacle that he was assassinated in. So I just wanted to make sure that we noted that. So the second cycle is ruled by the number one because he is born on the 19th of the month. So that means his second cycle is ruled by the number one. So number one is ideal for a second cycle. It's pretty good because it's the time for you to really concentrate on yourself and step out and do the things that you need to do to be independent. By your 28th birthday, you should be being more productive. And by age 31, you should have reached a leadership position if you have not already done so. But with Malcolm, we have seen already that he has, because we know that these cycles overlap. So we saw some of the start of his productive cycle in 1953 when he turned 28, where he was leading all of those mosques and he was building up all the mosques, and then he got assigned temple number 7. All of that stuff happened between his 28th and 31st birthday. So that's pretty interesting. And then, so his second pinnacle, like we said, is a number 9. That denotes completions, greatness, breadth of experience, brotherhood. It does indicate disappointment in the personal and reward in the universal. It is necessary to cultivate love, selflessness, and sympathy during this cycle with this as a pinnacle. And let's also note that his expression, which intensifies let's also note that his expression is a 9. And when your expression is the same as one of your pinnacles or challenges, that intensifies the energy. And we'll recall that, like I said, his expression was a 9, and that 9 could denote tragedy for those on life stage. And we see that as he was assassinated in this period of his second pinnacle of 9. And then his second challenge is a 7, and that's for Malcolm to be analytical, philosophical, in religion or metaphysics, be well educated. He should be using his skills and spiritual qualities for the public, understanding when things are outside of your own faculties, not blaming yourself and worrying yourself about those things. Cultivating faith and the beauty of justice is the general plan when you have this as a challenge. Don't be indifferent or aloof to situations and or people. This challenge will bring faith or fear, so it's up to you to decide which one you're going to embrace. And just don't limit yourself. This is one of those challenges that I would say don't limit yourself. So he is for his second cycle is a 1, the pinnacle is a 9, and the challenge is a 7. So what that tells me is this is a time for Malcolm of these are mental and spiritual numbers. The number 1 is mental, the number 7 and the number 9 are spiritual numbers. His productive cycle are dominated by these mental and spiritual numbers. And these numbers dictate it's going to be like a leadership cycle, spiritual development, faith, transformation, universalness, completion. And those are the leading factors that represented this time frame for Malcolm throughout his productive cycle. So let's go ahead and start going over the slides. So April 14th, 1957. During this time, one of the temple members, Johnson Hinton, is savagely beaten by police, and alerted by other followers, Malcolm joins a contingent of other Muslims and goes down to the 28th Precinct headquarters in Harlem, where he demands that Hinton receives medical attention. So this is one of the main things that drove Malcolm to get more in front of the public sector. He was doing things and he was building up the Nation of Islam, but this is the where he really got in front of the public, because what this did was it drew a huge crowd of media coverage. It started with about 500 people outside of the precinct, and it ended up being up to about 4,000 people, and it scared the police, it scared the precinct, that they were like, no one man should have all this power. And they started keeping tabs on him from there, from that New York precinct. The FBI was already keeping tabs on Malcolm since 1953. But this was when the New York precinct started keeping tabs on him, because they're like, no one should have this much power. And that's when kind of things started to get a little heated around the time frame for him. So yeah, so during that time, let's get what that was so we can get that analytic. That was April 14th, 1957. That was a 22-4 universal year. There goes his lytic, that 4 his challenge and his top pinnacle. And that 1 personal year, that is his individual frequency. It was in an 8 universal month. and a 5 personal month, and that was a 4 universal day and a 1 personal day for Malcolm. Again, a 22 universal day and a 1 personal day for Malcolm. Very interesting to note. Those are lytics that we're going to be obviously tracking to see how these things unfolded for Malcolm. So then we get on to the incident in 1958. That's when he married Betty, and that's when they had their first child. So that's interesting to note. That happened in a 5 universal year, an 11 personal year for Malcolm. So that denotes a lot of changes. He got married in that year and he had children. So those are some changes for him. With the 2, that's a pregnancy cycle. So that denotes that you may be either getting married or expanding your family, having a baby. So that totally makes all the sense in the world to me. That happened in 1958. And then when we get to 1959, he makes this is now him getting into again this 7 challenge and really this 9 pinnacle. He makes his first trip abroad, traveling abroad. He visits Ghana, Sudan, Nigeria, Iran, Syria, Egypt, and the United Arab Republic. And then he has an illness that prevents him from traveling to Mecca at that point in time. But this was his first trip abroad. So this is indicative of that 7 challenge and that 9 pinnacle being more universal. 7 denotes traveling over land or sea and really traveling for your work and traveling to be introspective and study other cultures and knowledge and get knowledge of other cultures. So that's makes all the sense to me in the world. And that was in a 6 universal year and a 3 personal year. 3 is the year of expansion. So that makes sense that he did that in that time frame. And then let's see, later on that year in July 13th, 1959, Malcolm participated in a 5-part documentary by Mike Wallace entitled The Hate That Hate Produced. Now, to talk about this for a little bit, yeah, Honorable Elijah Muhammad did not want Malcolm to be a part of this documentary. These were around the times that things started. They didn't start now, but it was the start of it. It was the beginning of it because like I said, we talked about in the first video that the karmic lessons in Malcolm's name shown that he might be a little impressionable and absorb the surroundings that he's in and just listen to others. And he's a leader, but he'll listen to others. But now that he's into this one cycle, that's all over with. Because as a one cycle, this is a leadership cycle. He's not really into listening to what other people are telling him. He's stepping out and doing his own thing. So it makes sense that he's making his own decisions now. And that maybe we'll see that causes a little trouble for him. And when he did this series, that was again, he was still in that 6 universal year, 3 personal year, that 6-3 up cycle. It was a 4-1 universal month, personal month cycle, and that 8 universal day, 5 personal day cycle for Malcolm when he did that documentary. So that 5 personal day, he was taking a risk doing that because he was asked not to do it. So he took a risk doing it with that 4 that could have been that 4 universal month that could have been like an unexpected thing. It was odd and unusual, unexpected. And when he did it, and also with the 8 universal day, creating a legacy doing that because that created legacy. That's a part of some of the speeches that we have today and some of the commentary that we have today on Malcolm. That is what it is. That's what happens when you're in a one cycle. You do your own thing and you're not going to be listening to too much of what other people have to say. And then let's get on to 1960, where Malcolm arranges for Fidel Castro and his entourage to stay at the Hotel Teresa after they are refused accommodations at a downtown hotel. So this is Malcolm being Malcolm and being universal. This was in a 7 universal year, a 4 personal year for Malcolm. So again, in a 7 year, that denotes travel over land or sea. That's either you traveling over land or sea or someone traveling over land or sea to come see you. And in this case, Fidel Castro traveled over land or sea to come to the Americas, and for whatever reason that was at the time, and he was being discriminated against like we all are here. Malcolm stepped in and did what he had to do for the family. So let's get on to the next one, 1961. Oh, wait, a little bit later in 1960, Malcolm established the newspaper Muhammad Speaks to promote the Nation of Islam's message. And that's interesting because later on in the cycle, when there's tumultuous times with the nation, they took that magazine back over for him and used it against him and slandered him in that same magazine that he started. So that's interesting. Okay. And then on to 1961. Elijah Muhammad, who is moved from Chicago to Phoenix for health reasons, makes Malcolm national representative of the Nation of Islam. So during this time in 1961, everything is still all cool with them. Malcolm's rising to the top like a number one should in that leadership role. That happened in the 8 universal year, which denotes that you may get recognized for your career, or your career might take off, or financial success, power of concentration, all that kind of stuff, creating legacies in an 8 universal year. Also, that happened in a 5 personal year for Malcolm. So that's also denotes that's a good career cycle. So that makes sense that in that 8-5 up cycle, Malcolm was promoted. And we just had an 8-5 universal week. And I actually got a promotion of sorts. So that's interesting energy to note when you have that 8-5 energy. That's career. So it's new opportunities, new things that might happen in your career, or travel in your career, or recognition, or achievement, or raises, or promotions, or different things like that. Pretty cool to note. Pretty cool to note. Oops, I got too excited. Hold on. Let me go back. Here we go. Okay, so that was in what year was that? We were in 1961, and that was the 8-5 up cycle. So let's get on to 1962. There was an altercation that led police to Los Angeles Temple, and it killed one of the unarmed secretaries, Ronald Stokes. And then Malcolm comes out and says they're going to pay for this. And he did that in one of the speeches. And that happened on April 27th, 1962. That was a 9 universal year, a 6 personal year for Malcolm, a 4 universal month, a personal month, and 4 universal day, a 1 personal day. So we see all of that individual frequency and pinnacle, top pinnacle, and first challenge energy still mixing in here. And we see that second and that third pinnacle energy is that 6 mixing in here. So very interesting to note that happened that day. And then a little bit later on in that year, Malcolm confirmed that Elijah Muhammad was engaged in the repeated adultery and had children with at least 3 of the young secretaries. And Malcolm said, quote, "I felt I was almost out of my mind getting that information." And Herbert Muhammad asked Muhammad Speaks to minimize coverage of Malcolm. So this is when they started turning on him at the Muhammad Speaks, when Malcolm brought out that information about the minister. That's when they started turning on him at the magazine. So this was in 1962. So again, that was in that 9 universal year, that 6 personal year. Problems in the brotherhood. These are problems. This is a part of the challenge that he's dealing with, and part of the pinnacle that he's dealing with. So very interesting to note this energy. And then when we get over to 1963, this is when he begins working on his autobiography with Alex Haley, and that was in a 1 universal year and a 7 personal year. And then later on in April of that same year, Malcolm flies to Phoenix with Elijah's son to confront him about the allegations, I'll say. And I just want to note that look how long it took him to go confront the minister about it. So this denotes some of the karmic lessons that we talked about with Malcolm in the first presentations, where he's slow to change, slow to handle matters of stress. Remember that slow to change and slow to handle matters of stress, with those no fives in his name, those no sixes, and all that kind of stuff. So this is indicative, and with all those fours, all of that denotes that slow material type of moving energy with thinking and slow to handle matters. So it took him almost a year to go confront him after he knew about the information and started talking about it. So that just goes to show that these numbers matter. And if you don't know your numbers, please reach out to me at numerolix.biz. Reach out to me on the Moonline. Just ask me a question. Just get started. And we can start small if you want, but you need to know your numbers. You need to know this energy. So make sure you hit me up for a keys chart, or just hit me up to ask me questions, and then you can get comfortable if you want, and then you can get a keys chart. Just wanted to make sure I let the family know that. Okay. So where were we in 1963 in April? So let's see what April was, a 5 universal month, and that 11 personal month for Malcolm. And then when we get to a little bit later in August 28th, 1963, Malcolm observes the March on Washington, which he calls a farce. Malcolm claims that the demonstration was run by whites in front of a statue of a president who has been dead for 100 years and who don't like us, who didn't even like us when he was alive. More controversy that Malcolm's having as he's entering into these latter years of his life, unbeknownst to him at this time. He's having a little controversy here and he's letting people know that this stuff that y'all are doing is phony and fake, and he's not standing for it. So he's standing 10 toes down on that. And that's what that is at the end of the day. So let's move on to the next year. Let me see, later in December of 1963, just a few days after John F. Kennedy has been assassinated, Malcolm speaks at the Nation of Islam rally in New York in response to the question and describes the foul play in the United States is committed around the world and in the states that that Kennedy slaying is a case of chickens coming home to roost. Now, again, this is really when some dissension started with the nation because all of that was going on. And then Elijah Muhammad didn't want him saying that. He didn't want him responding to that. He was getting like death threats from people in the nation and different things like that. There was a lot going on around this time. So 3 days after that, Elijah Muhammad, who ordered Malcolm not to comment on the assassination, responds by silencing Malcolm for 90 days, during which time Malcolm is forbidden to teach or talk to the press. So again, Malcolm's doing what he wants. He's in his one cycle. He's sitting there with that 9 pinnacle and that 7 challenge, and he's going for what he knows, and he's being an expert in his field, and he's not allowing anyone to stop him or tell him what to do, especially in light of the other information that came out about Elijah Muhammad that he has already now confronted him with. He's really, if this is how people are, he's just going to listen to his own path. And that's what he really should be doing anyway as a one person, because he's a leader. This is the energy it gives. And it's just interesting to note. So then let's get into 1964. So in 1964, we'll start in January. January 6th, Malcolm left with Elijah Muhammad, who orders him to put out the fire. January 6th, Malcolm met with Elijah Muhammad, who orders him to put out the fire you started about the leaders, about he. On January 6th, Malcolm met with Elijah Muhammad, who orders him to put out the fire he started about all the rumors about him, about all the adultery. So Malcolm is removed as the nation's national representative and as the minister of Harlem Temple number 7. So this happened on January 6th. Let's get what that is. January 6th, 1964. That was a 3 universal month and a 9 personal month, and a 9 universal day and a 6 personal day. It was a 2 universal year and an 8 personal year. So again, we see his challenge number showing up. We see his karmic lessons and we see his pinnacles. So very interesting to note that this is starting to happen around this time. All right. And then we have another incident that happened on January 15th. Let me see. Here it goes. January 15th, 1964. Malcolm and his family spend a week at the boxer Cassius Clay's house. He was getting friendly with him during this time. So that's pretty cool. Like I said, I love the commonality between all of the brothers back then. And I wish it could be more like that now. That's the kings up mentality. You kings need to understand your power, your position, and your purpose. And stop arguing and fighting and killing each other, please. All right, back to normal business. We're in January 15th, 1964. So then later on in April, Malcolm delivers his famous election year speech, The Ballot or the Bullet. Then he leaves for a 5 week tour to Egypt, Lebanon, Liberia, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, Saudi Arabia, where he makes pilgrimage to Mecca and receives his new name, El-Hajj Malik El Shabazz. So April, so here, let's get this. April 1964. April 1964, that was a 6 universal month and a 3 personal month. This is when Malcolm made his second transformation and he went from Malcolm X to his new name, El-Hajj Malik El Shabazz. So let's take a look real quick at the name change. This is his name change. So when he did this name change, is transformation. He transformed his Pythagorean expression to a 21-3, which is the main challenge number of his life. And he transformed his Chaldean expression to a 34-7, which is the second challenge of his life. So he literally, by going to Mecca and making pilgrimage and getting this enlightenment, and by doing all this, he essentially changed his name to give him the talents, abilities, skills, and knowledge, the tasks to fulfill his destiny, to negate his challenges and his karmic lessons in everything. This is what can happen when you change your name and when you do things and do work to transform yourself. So this is my Malcolm's second transformation, and I think it's brilliant that this is the way that it happened. So let's get these back up on the screen because we're almost done here. So that happened in April of 1964. Oh, and I skipped March. In March in 1964, he was suspended indefinitely by the Nation of Islam. And that's when he announced his plans to form his own organization called the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And then in April he made his pilgrimage and changed his name and did his transformation with his name. So then let's take a look real quick at these, because we're about to get now into 1965, the year that he was assassinated. Okay, and we're going to start, oops, keep going the wrong way on these slides. We're going to start with February 14th. On that date, let's just get the up cycle. It was a 3-9 up cycle. It was a 5-11 cycle, universal month cycle. It was a 1-7 UD cycle, a universal day cycle. Okay. So he was in this up cycle on this day. And on this day, his home in Elmhurst is firebombed. And Malcolm says that it's upon the orders of Elijah Muhammad, and his family's evicted 4 days later. So there goes that four again. And then there was on February 19th, which was a 6 universal day and a 3 personal day. Malcolm told an interviewer that the Nation of Islam was actively trying to kill him because, again, during this time there were a lot of threats on Malcolm's life, and there was active threats from them on him during this time, and it was real. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm was preparing to address the OAAU in Manhattan at the Audubon Ballroom when someone in about 400-person audience, when someone in the audience yelled out an expletive. I'm not going to say all that what it is. And get your hand out my pocket. And Malcolm X and his bodyguards, they tried to block him, but this is when he was assassinated. He was pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m. Shortly after that, and then they did the autopsy, and it was identified that there were 21 gunshot wounds to his chest, left shoulder, arms, and legs, including 10 buckshot wounds from the initial shotgun blast. So this happened on a 3 universal year, a 9 personal year. Completions is that 9. A 5 universal month, 11 personal month, dramatic changes. And with that 11, that 11 is a number of martyrdom. So that 11 showed up very strong a lot throughout Malcolm's cycle. He had a lot of 11 personal months and universal months and years. And then the 8 universal day, which is legacy and fate. On a 5 personal day, dramatic changes, risk with the public. And another thing to note, so let me remove this because that's the end of the slides. Another thing to note, during that time, Malcolm was in his vacation cycle, which I'll note is the sixth cycle in our 52-day birthday to birthday cycle. It's the sixth cycle, which again is that's one of his challenge numbers. He shouldn't have been even doing that speech in that vacation cycle. That's not the time to be doing that. He should have been doing that a cycle ahead of that in the success cycle before that. And then during his vacation cycle, he should have been like chilling out with his family, especially during the month of February, where it's a significant month for him and a lot happens to him in that month over his life. So these are the reasons why numbers matter, you guys, why it matters for you to know what cycle you're in, where you're at, what you should be doing, if your tide is in, if your tide is out. This is why it matters. So on the date that he was assassinated, if he would have had an astronumerologist, they would have told him, Malcolm, don't go do that speech. And people were telling him that. People were telling Malcolm that. They was telling him, "Don't go do that speech," but Malcolm is Malcolm, and he's in a one cycle, and he's a one person, and ain't nobody gonna be telling him what to do. And he, like he said, he didn't fear death, and he did what he had to do, and he sacrificed himself for the nation. He put in the work. He transformed himself. He put in the hard work. He put in decades of knowledge and speeches and just different speeches and interviews to let the family know what's going on. And he had boots on ground. He was doing things in the nation and helping people get off of dope and just a lot of different things. Just a phenomenal person. A Black American great. That's my tagline. We are the bag, Black American greatness. He exemplifies that. So I hope you have enjoyed that. That is his cycle. So let's get on to the last slide to look at his lytics. We looked at the name already. These are his completed lytics. Let me put them up on the screen big. All right. So these are the lytics. So these are the numbers that dominated throughout his whole life. We looked at the ones that dominated throughout the developmental cycle. These are the numbers that developed that dominated throughout the rest of his cycle. So let's take a look. So that challenge number is baby, that challenge number has gone strong. That number three, like I told you before, three, the third challenge is the challenge that's going to be with you for your whole life. And that's the challenge that led for him. It led his life. It led a lot of the things that happened. Obviously, we see through these lytics. The second thing was the number four, which is his key name. It was also his first challenge, and it's also his last pinnacle. So very interesting that the number four is in second place here. The third thing that led, and this is a change from the other slide because four and three were leading on the other lytic slide for the developmental cycle. But on this one, the destiny number has moved up. So the life path five has moved up in second place, tying with the key name and tying with the challenge and the pinnacle. So that's very interesting to note. That tells me that Malcolm fulfilled his destiny. It was cut short, but he did the things to fulfill his destiny in his life. And then, of course, this is no surprise. The individual frequency number one is in fourth place there with 18 lytics tracking for his name. So that's not a surprise. The individual frequency denotes your personality, things that you're attracted to, your mental capacity and all that kind of stuff, your mood and your outlook. And then we look at the next vital few, which is just made it under the vital few, is that number six, which we talked about that number six in the first video, his tumultuous relationship with that number six, being born in the period of the six, being his opposition number, that being his first pinnacle number, that being it's also his, I think it's his second challenge number. Hold on, let me see what the other number it was, because that was one of my corrections. Yep. So it's his first pinnacle, his third pinnacle, and it's also was also a karmic lesson in his name. So that number six slid right in there, and then that number nine is running a close second. I would probably put that number nine in his vital few, and that is it. I think this is a beautiful graph. It really represents all of these numbers that we went through on this first chart. This is a developmental chart. These were the developmental lytics up through that time. Again, you see the 3, 4, 1, and 9 led up through the developmental cycle. And then when we got through the productive cycle, the 3, 4, 5, and 1 and 6 lead. Okay. So very interesting. It's very interesting energy to read. I'm very pleased to be able to have brought you part two tonight. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I really hope that you were enlightened and you learned something new about Malcolm X, or you learned something new about numerology. And make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe and share this with a friend. And hit us up on the moon line if you want to get your keys chart. And also make sure you tune in with us because we're going to have astronumerologist on in a couple weeks. Kimberly, she's going to be on talking about her business astronumerology. So I'm excited. That's going to be the next Numbers Matter show. I'm excited to bring the queen back on the platform. She's been on the platform plenty of times, and I'm excited to bring her back. Make sure you tune in with us on the other shows that we have. Again, this show has been an example of what we do at Justice on Earth and Numbers Matter. what you're tuned into now, the crossover show. And we also have culture reflections where we bring the community positive reflections in the culture, and our hip hop hour where we talk to hip hop artists that are doing their thing in the industry. So I want to thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Make sure you get your numbers, make sure you have your keys. Hit me up for your keys chart, and make sure that you take care of each other. Peace, love, kings and queens up to the nation. Peace.
Queens up in your hood because it's essential. Triple the investment, stocks and bonds, build a nest egg. Comfortable life, seed safe at the rest place.